I'm Alina Song for the Power of the Patient project. Today, we are joined by Megan Logan, who is a licensed clinical social worker and an author of the Self-Love Workbook for Women, Release Self-Doubt, Build Self-Compassion, and Embrace Who You Are. She graduated from James Madison University in Virginia with a bachelor's degree in social work and a minor in family issues. She then received a master's degree in clinical social work from the Florida State University. Megan treats patients going through mood disorders, grief, loss, eating disorders, personality disorders, sexual abuse, incest, and children or adolescents. She creates a safe and warm environment for her patients, which encourages conversation. Together, they work on finding solutions to problems her patients are facing. Please welcome Megan Logan.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. Can you explain the role of the licensed clinical social worker in our mental health system?
So, a lot of people think of social workers as somebody who's going to come in and take the children away. And while social workers certainly work with child safety and work with families in need, licensed clinical social workers have specialized training in behavioral health and psychopathology and are able to work in a more clinical framework. So, I was drawn to social work because it's so diverse in terms of professional opportunities. I've worked in domestic violence and sexual assault centers. I work for hospice. I work for an inpatient psychiatric facility. I'm in private practice now. So social work offers a lot of diversity. And one of the main things of the background and training with social work is to focus on the person in the environment that they're in. So we don't just look at the individual person right in front of us. We'll look at them in context with their families and then in the society and how society influences them. So I think that social work is very important because it has that background and training.
That's great. Thank you for the explanation. So I know that your specialty is in EMDR, play therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy. Could you explain what these are and how they are different?
So it's interesting. They're very different. And I, for whatever reason in my career, came along these different therapeutic modalities and was really drawn to each of them for different reasons. So eye movement desensitization reprocessing is the EMDR. That is a technique that we can use specifically when somebody has gone through trauma or is suffering from PTSD. So the way that it works is by bilaterally stimulating the brain, which sounds very technical, but it's actually pretty simple. It's either somebody's eye movements are going back and forth, or they're holding buzzers and they're holding them in their hand while it's vibrating. When the buzzer goes in the right side, when there's stimulation on the right side, it activates the left part of the brain. When it's on the left side, it activates the right part. And so traditional talk therapy, we're in our left brains. We're processing and gaining insight and using our cognitive parts to understand things, but it doesn't always connect with the memory and the emotions and what's frozen from the trauma. So EMDR, by stimulating both parts of your brain, you're able to tap into both sides and connect it together. Where if I'm in talk therapy with somebody, they might say, well, I know it wasn't my fault, or I know that I'm safe right now, but they don't really feel it in their heart. They know it in their head. When you do EMDR, you know it in your head and you're connecting it with your heart and your emotions so that you actually believe it and feel it. So traditional talk therapy is like walking across country, and EMDR is like flying a plane in terms of how quick you can get results. So it's highly effective and it's a best practice in treating trauma. Play therapy is a little bit different than that because it's using play. And so I use a lot of play therapy when I work with children. Play is the language that children use. They communicate through play. So if you try to sit a child down on the sofa and ask them how they're feeling, you're going to get maybe mad or sad. And that's going to be the extent of it. They don't want to sit and have a conversation. But you bring out puppets and you bring out the sand tray and you bring out creative art supplies, and that's where the magic happens. And kids can get very invested and can project their struggles internally onto their objects that they're using for play therapy. So it's magical, it's fun and creative, but it's also really, really powerful. And there's different kinds of play therapy. There's more of a non-directive approach where you sit back and you let the child lead. Then there's more interactive and direct. I like to think of play therapy If I was playing a game with my children as mom, I would probably correct them if they were trying to cheat. I'd say, hey, that's not okay. You can't cheat. If I'm doing play therapy, I'm saying, oh, you really want to win. You want to win so badly that you just moved your man in front of me. And so you're just doing it in a lot more gentle, indirect way. Okay, so dialectical behavior therapy is different from both of those. DBT is a technique that was developed by Marsha Linehan for people with borderline personality disorder. And it is a skills training, it's intensive, it's long-term. So you are committed to doing skills training groups where you're learning, you have a workbook and you're doing handouts and exercises. And then you're also processing how you're applying that in your life to an individual therapist. I use DBT. I used to use it in that way when I worked in certain facilities where we had the capability of doing that intensive work. In private practice, I may just do it one-on-one with somebody. But it is teaching you interpersonal effectiveness skills, how to be able to ask for what you need or what you want without manipulating or being passive or passive aggressive. It teaches you how to regulate your emotions and how to tolerate distress so that you're not engaging in self-destructive or harmful behaviors. Also, there's a component of mindfulness that is kind of interwoven throughout DBT, and that is teaching people how to be able to be in the moment and recognize what their thoughts are and what their feelings are. So it's very skill driven. I personally think that all high school students should have to have DBT. The skills are that good. I use them every day in my daily life. So it's, it's designed for somebody with borderline personality disorder, but I think I use it in some form or fashion, probably in every session.
Nice. It seems like there's a different therapy that you should be using for different like age groups, different people, like different with like different reasons for coming to the clinic and such. So that's thank you so much for taking your time to explain that in details. So let's move on a little bit to your renowned book. Tell us about your book, Self-Love Workbook for Women. Why did you write it and what can patients gain from the workbook?
So it's interesting. I didn't set out to write the workbook. I think the workbook wrote me.
Oh,
I was getting these emails from this publishing marketing company last year about writing the self-love workbook for women, and I didn't understand why I was getting the emails because I'm a clinician. And then I decided, you know what, I could probably do that. That's something that's right up my alley. Self-love has been a lifelong journey for me, but then I've also, it's a cornerstone to the work that I do in therapy. When you're working with trauma, when you're working with eating disorders and healthy relationships, all of those things are rooted in having strong self-love. So it was easy for me to write in the sense that I had all of that therapeutic knowledge and expertise to be able to put into the book. The book is special in my mind because it's a workbook and it's designed for people to actually have practical, specific exercise and the prompts and skills that they can use to do the work. So there's a lot of books out there about self-love and self-compassion that are brilliant, and they make a lot of sense when you read them. But then when it comes to how do you apply that into your day-to-day life, when you're cooking dinner after you've worked all day and you're trying to take care of kids, then this gives you practical steps and exercises to use.
that's great. Yeah, sometimes I have like diaries that I like, oh, I need to write self-affirmation down, but then I'm stuck on like the blank page. What do I write down to write that down, right? So I think it's a great starting point for a lot of people, especially patients, people who need that kind of work exercise.
Yeah,
Um,
it's have it kind of be guided because it's overwhelming. Self-love is so broad. It's like, where do you even start with that? So it is a good place to start. It's written in a very kind, compassionate, gentle way. And then the exercises, though, are not necessarily simple and easy. They're written in simple language, but they can be challenging and kind of vulnerable to do at the same time.
that's great. So why is self-love so important, not only to women, but to men as well?
I wish the book was called the Self-Love Workbook for Humans because women are a special population that we tend to be caregivers and extend ourselves to everybody and put ourselves last. But self-love is for anybody, all genders, all humans need to have a foundation of self-love. Self-love allows you to not give up. It allows you to keep going. When you're kind and you're compassionate to yourself, you continue to encourage yourself to keep going towards your goals. And self-love allows you to have healthier relationships with people. It helps you set boundaries, communicate your needs. It helps you recognize what your special gifts are, maybe your talents that you have. And in my mind, that's going to make the world a more beautiful place when people recognize their gifts and talents and they can share them outward in the world. So I think self-love is not just a personal thing. I think it can radically change the world that we live in.
Oh, I love that saying so much. And then definitely for sure, if it's just women practicing it, then when they're in relationship with somebody else and they don't practice self-love, it's going to be like hard to go have that relationship work both ways. So I think any population, any human should buy this workbook and exercise with it.
Exactly.
Um,
I think that's very true too, because when you start to love yourself, you start to pick up on people that don't. You start to recognize it's a subtle type of feeling that you have, and you start to see when there's toxic patterns and unhealthy dynamics. And so everybody needs to do their part and do their work so that we can have healthier relationships.
right. So I'm curious, how has COVID pandemic changed the way you work with your patients? Like you have different therapies in place. How was that affected by the pandemic?
So it's been interesting, especially for EMDR, because EMDR is one that you're either looking or you're holding these buzzers in your hands. And so with the pandemic, that was really hard to do by telehealth. And there's some different programs that have been developed, I guess, that have allowed for that to be done on a telehealth platform. That's probably the biggest change I've noticed in providing services, is the whole ability to use telehealth. It's kind of amazing that I can see somebody who's in Miami and they're not right in front of me. And that's now the norm. It's not something that's special. It's something we do on a regular basis. So I think also, and this is more of a personal thing, the pandemic kind of changed a lot of people's philosophies about life. Like we slowed down, we realized what was important. Some people are like, I need to have connection, I can't stand being isolated. And other people are thinking, I have a break, this is really nice, I need to not work so much. And so that's shifted a little bit for me professionally, in the sense that I'm doing probably seeing less people and putting a little bit more quality into what I'm doing, because I'm just not willing to continue to keep working at the pace that I was.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think your workbook came at like a really great time because a lot of people were suffering with like depression.
Mhm.
Practicing with social distancing was hard on a lot of people, and that workbook would have been like a great exercise for many people to have so that they can keep telling themselves, "Oh, I need to love myself. Oh, I am important person."
It's very true. I think that clinically we're probably still seeing the effects of the pandemic in terms of social anxiety and depression, and just changes in people's lives that they've had to adapt and adjust. And any change creates an adjustment disorder for most people. So.
Okay, so I have one last question. So finally, what are some advice you would give to people going through hardship so that then they can navigate through that and then find solutions to their problems?
So I would probably say the times that I've had hardships in my life, the thing that I notice is that I tend to isolate and pull away from people. And then I also feel like it's never going to get better. So what I would try to help people with is to realize that there's help available, that you don't have to suffer in hardships alone. A lot of times it's hard to reach out for help, or we don't want to be a burden, or maybe we don't have a support system. And so we can feel like we don't have anybody. So I would recommend people to call a crisis line, or to get into therapy, or to reach out to a friend that they haven't connected with in a long time, or to find some way of connecting. I think that's really critical. And then the feeling of hopelessness, that it's just never going to change, it's never going to get better. I think practicing mindfulness can be very helpful, to be in the present and realize the only thing that exists is this present moment. This too shall pass. When we are struggling, a lot of times we're thinking about the past, or we're thinking about the future, and we're not in the present moment. When you live in the present moment, the present moment will not last. There will be a new present moment. And so one thing that I always tell myself when I'm struggling, when I have a really long day and I'm really struggling with it, is like, you know what, in 8 hours I can come home and put my pajamas on. It's going to be okay.
That's a great motivation.
Yeah, so our time continues to keep happening, and so we get stuck when we feel trapped, when we're not thinking it's ever going to change. And once you have those two things in place, then and you've gotten help, then you can come up with more ways to concretely change and problem solve. But the connection's really critical.
For sure. And there's still so much stigma surrounding any like mental health disorders. So it's hard for people to seek out help when they really need it. So I think your work is very important in that sense, so that people are able to open up when they do visit you, and that they keep seeking, practicing that self-love.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can, join a Facebook group or do something that is a little bit more private if you're really struggling with kind of putting yourself out there. I know there's been times I've seen a therapist in my life, and I used to think, well, I have to pay somebody to give me support, and I've had to change that way of thinking. Well, yeah, you know what? I do. I don't have support in other areas, and I do. It's okay to do that and to have a professional help you work through that.
Right, right. Any last comments for us?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I love talking shop and
Thank you
talking
so
about
much for
mental health. So,
hmm Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And please check out her book, Self Love Workbook for Women. And this was Elena Song for the Power of the Patient Project.